In February 2003, police arrived at a mansion in Alhambra, California. They found a woman dead in the foyer, a single gunshot wound to the mouth. The man who lived there, Phil Spector, met officers at the door with blood on his jacket. He said, "I think I killed somebody." That man had produced more #1 hits than almost anyone in history. He had worked with the Beatles. He had invented a recording technique that defined the sound of an entire century. And he had spent 30 years holding people at gunpoint. Nobody had stopped him. This is that story. Harvey Philip Spector was born in the Bronx in 1939. His father, Benjamin, was a steel worker. When Phil was 9 years old, Benjamin drove to a cemetery, connected a hose to his exhaust pipe, and killed himself. His gravestone read, "To know him was to love him." Phil would later use that phrase as the title of his first #1 hit. He was 17 years old. The family moved to Los Angeles after the suicide. His mother, Bertha, worked double shifts, and Phil, small, odd, obsessive, retreated into music. He taught himself guitar. He sat in on recording sessions. He watched how sound worked. At 16, he was hanging around Gold Star Studios on Santa Monica Boulevard, pestering engineers to let him watch. They eventually let him in. He was absorbing everything. In 1958, Phil Spector formed a group called the Teddy Bears with 2 friends from Fairfax High School. They recorded a song he'd written, inspired by his father's gravestone. "To know him is to love him" hit #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. Phil Spector was 17 years old and had the most popular song in America. Most people would have enjoyed that moment. Phil Spector wanted more. He wanted control. He didn't want to be an artist. He wanted to be the architect of sound itself. He moved to New York. He studied under songwriting legends Jerry Lieber and Mike Stoller. He watched how the music business worked. He learned that producers held the real power, not the singers, not the bands. By 1961, he was back in Los Angeles. He was 21 years old. He had a plan. In 1961, Phil Spector co-founded a record label called Phillies Records. He had a theory about music. Pop songs of the era were recorded quickly and cheaply. A few musicians in a room, clean separation between instruments, everything neat and orderly. Spector hated this. He thought music should feel like an experience, like being inside something overwhelming, like standing in front of a wave that was about to break on top of you. He called it the Wall of Sound. Here is how he built it. He booked Gold Star Studios, which had unusually reverberant echo chambers. Then he hired an extraordinary collection of session musicians, a group that would eventually become known as the Wrecking Crew. Some of the most talented players in Los Angeles. But instead of recording them in the traditional way, he stacked them. 3 guitarists playing the same part, 4 piano players, multiple bassists, a full orchestra, horn sections, percussion players, doubling each other in the same room. Then he ran everything through the echo chambers simultaneously. The result was a dense, shimmering wall of noise. No single instrument identifiable, everything blending into one enormous sonic texture. It was unlike anything that had been heard before, and then he put singers on top of it. The first voice he put on top of his wall of sound was Ronnie Bennett. He first saw her in 1961 at a club in Manhattan. She was 19. She sang with her sister and her cousin in a group that would become the Ronettes. Spector was transfixed. Her voice, raw, yearning, slightly out of control, was exactly what he needed. He produced Be My Baby with the Ronettes in 1963. The drum intro alone, 4 beats that sounded like a heartbeat, became one of the most famous openings in rock and roll history. Brian Wilson later said hearing that song changed his life. Then came Then he kissed me with the crystals, chapel of love with the Dixie cups. You've lost that lovin' feelin' with the Righteous Brothers, which would later be named the most played song in American radio history. Hit after hit after hit. Magazines called him the first tycoon of teen. Time magazine ran a profile. He was 23 years old and arguably the most powerful producer in the world. But inside the studio, something was shifting. Spector had always been controlling. Now he became tyrannical. Sessions would run 12, 14, 16 hours. Musicians were not allowed to leave without his permission. He would stop a take because of something only he could hear, some tiny imperfection in the blend, and make everyone start over from the beginning. He carried a gun. At first it seemed like an affectation, a power move, a way of making sure everyone understood who was in charge. Later, it became clear it wasn't a performance. In 1968, Phil Spector married Ronnie Bennett. She became Ronnie Spector, and almost immediately, she became a prisoner. Spector was terrified of losing her. He was also terrified of the world, of other people touching what was his, of losing control over anything he had claimed. He pulled her off the road. The Ronettes had been one of the biggest acts in the world. He ended their career without asking her permission. He kept her inside their mansion in Beverly Hills. He removed the telephones. He made her wear a wig in public so she would be harder to recognize. He hired his mother to live with them, not to help, but to watch. He installed a life-size cardboard cutout of himself at the foot of the bed, so she would see it if she tried to leave in the night. He told her that if she ever escaped, he would have her killed, that her body would never be found, that he had people everywhere. Ronnie later wrote about a pair of shoes she kept hidden near the back of the property, just in case, just so she could run. She eventually escaped in 1972. She walked out of the house barefoot. She got to a phone. She called her mother. She wrote about all of this in her 1990 memoir, Be My Baby. Spector hired lawyers. He fought for custody of their adopted children and won. He kept the children. Nobody stopped him. During the same period, he was still producing music, still being celebrated. In 1969 and 1970, the Beatles were disintegrating. They had a massive backlog of unfinished recordings from a documentary project called Get Back. No one could agree on what to do with them. John Lennon brought in Phil Spector to finish the album. Paul McCartney was not told. Spector added orchestras. He added choirs. He transformed McCartney's spare, intimate ballad, The Long and Winding Road, into something McCartney considered unrecognizable, buried under strings and voices Paul had never asked for. McCartney was furious. He publicly demanded that Spector's production be removed. He was ignored. The album, Let It Be, was released in 1970 and became one of the best-selling albums of all time. Phil Spector won a Grammy for it. By the mid-1970s, Phil Spector had largely withdrawn from the music industry. Part of this was circumstance. His wall of sound technique, once revolutionary, had been absorbed and replicated. Music had moved in other directions. The dense orchestral production he pioneered was no longer fashionable. But the deeper reason was Phil Spector himself. The guns were no longer a performance. In 1972, he invited the Ramones to make a record with him. The Ramones were one of the founding acts of punk rock, raw, fast, deliberately primitive. They had spent their careers actively rejecting everything Spector's wall of sound represented. The sessions at Gold Star were nightmares. Spector arrived armed. He made the band play the same songs for hours. He pointed a pistol at bassist Dee Ramone during an argument. He pointed another at guitarist Johnny Ramone and told him if he tried to leave, he would not leave alive. The album, End of the Century, was eventually finished. It confused Ramones fans and sold poorly. The Ramones later called working with Spector the worst experience of their careers. Spector retreated further. He moved into a Gothic mansion in Alhambra, a city east of Los Angeles, and almost never left. The mansion was called Pyrenees Castle. It had turrets, it had armed guards, it had security cameras on every entrance. Inside, Spector had surrounded himself with bodyguards, hangers-on, and a rotating cast of people who depended on his money. He wore elaborate wigs to cover his thinning hair. He wore platform shoes. He carried multiple firearms. Former employees described him as someone who had lost contact with the ordinary rules of social interaction. Someone who believed, genuinely believed, that he existed outside normal consequences. He had always believed this. Now there was nothing left to distract him from it. In 1991, he was involved in an incident where he pointed a gun at a woman at a party. Police were called. Nothing happened. In 1993, another incident with a gun at a party. Police were called. Nothing happened. In 2000, Stephanie Jennings, a woman who worked for Spector, alleged that he had pointed a gun at her head and told her she was not allowed to leave his house. Police were called. Nothing happened. 3 documented incidents involving firearms. 3 women. No charges. No consequences. Lana Clarkson was 40 years old in February 2003. She was an actress and model who had appeared in several films in the 1980s, most notably a Roger Corman fantasy film called Barbarian Queen. By 2003, those roles were behind her. She was working as a hostess at a club in West Hollywood called the House of Blues. On the night of February 3, 2003, Phil Spector arrived at the House of Blues. He sat at a table in Lana Clarkson's section. He was charming. He was famous. He invited her to come back to his castle for a drink. She went with him. At approximately 5 a.m., Spector's driver, Adriano de Souza, was waiting outside in the limousine. He heard a loud bang. Spector emerged from the house holding a gun. De Souza heard him say, in Portuguese, "I think I killed somebody." Police arrived and found Lana Clarkson in a chair in the foyer, a single gunshot wound to the mouth. Phil Spector told police she had kissed the gun, that it was an accidental suicide. Forensic evidence told a different story. Blood spatter was found on Spector's jacket, the kind of pattern consistent with a shooter, not a bystander. Clarkson's hands showed no gunshot residue. Her teeth had been broken by the gun being forced into her mouth. Phil Spector was arrested. He posted bail of $1 million and went home. His first trial, in 2007, ended in a hung jury. His second trial began in 2008. Prosecutors brought forward 5 other women. Each one described the same pattern. Phil Spector, a gun, a threat, a locked door, a woman not allowed to leave. 5 women, over 30 years. In 2009, Phil Spector was convicted of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 19 years to life. He was 69 years old. Phil Spector died in prison on January 16, 2021. He was 81 years old. The cause was complications from COVID-19. He had served 11 years. What he left behind is genuinely complicated. The wall of sound technique he invented is everywhere in modern music. You can hear it in the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds. You can hear it in Christmas songs that play every year in every store in every country. Because Phil Spector produced the most played Christmas album in history with Darlene Love in 1963. You can hear the echo of his technique in records that came out this decade. His production credits include some of the most celebrated albums ever made. He was also a man who spent his entire adult life terrorizing women, who pointed guns at people, who imprisoned his wife, who killed Lana Clarkson. The music industry celebrated him for decades while the pattern was visible. The women warned people. The guns were not a secret. Ronnie Spector survived him. She died in January 2022, 1 year after Phil Spector from cancer. In her final years, she toured, she recorded. She talked about what had happened to her. She said that music had saved her, that she had survived by holding on to the songs, and she had made some of the greatest of them. Phil Spector put her voice on a wall of sound and made her immortal. And then he spent years trying to make sure she could never leave. That